Hi guys, I'm Teresa, this is my YouTube channel, and today I want to talk to you about projection, projective identification, and how they play out in scapegoating abuse and psychological abuse. So projection is a process that was first studied and described during the golden era of psychoanalysis by people like Sigmund Freud, Carl Gustav Jung, and Melanie Klein. Carl Jung once stated that projections change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face. That means that you have people who are not very psychologically aware, they are not very psychologically evolved and very emotionally mature, and they have some sort of an idealized idea of themselves, and everything that is inside their psyche, they sort of suppress it. So that can be inferiority complexes, that could be jealousy, that could be some sort of aggressive tendencies, and they suppress it and then they project it onto somebody else. But they don't only project it, they also push that narrative on that person that is the recipient of that projection. That process is called projective identification, and it sort of forces the recipient of the projection to accept that narrative about themselves, even if it doesn't agree with who that person actually is. Now that might sound kind of crazy, but it frequently happens to children who are born into dysfunctional families, into families where there are members with narcissistic tendencies or narcissistic personality disorders, where there are unprocessed problems, where there could be alcohol problems, and the family is not emotionally evolved and mature enough to look at themselves. So they will choose a child that will be branded the problem, the difficult child. Naturally, this could be a child that has a tendency to act out against that dysfunction. They might have a tendency to complain against the alcoholic behaviors, against abusive behaviors, or perhaps is a child that makes somebody in that family jealous and triggers their inferiority complexes. There will be usually someone in that family who is kind of a primary projector, who drives that story, who presses this narrative onto that child, and they kind of make the child absorb this narrative by treating them as a problem. And the child, because it's young, it doesn't have properly evolved sense of self, even if it feels some sort of an injustice is happening to them, on some sort of a level they will feel like there must be something wrong with them, because otherwise mommy and daddy wouldn't be treating them like they are some sort of an awful problem. So the child has this sort of a wound, and that wound then means that as the child goes through life, they will frequently attract projections from all sorts of people in their surroundings. It's a very difficult place to be, because you don't get to be who you are. You are always somebody else's story of you, and that usually has serious impacts on your mental health. The projecting family is so involved with the story that they really believe in it. They really do believe that you are some sort of a problem, and they need this story to maintain their own mental balance, because they are not mature and evolved enough to look at themselves. They need to keep telling themselves that you are a liar, you are a problem, you're difficult, that if only you had behaved, the family would be great. They need to maintain this lie, because perhaps if they were to look at themselves, they would, I don't know, have a breakdown. It's just how it works. So if you are put into this situation, you at some point will have to leave that scapegoating family or whatever other group that is, because there is no way that they will ever change their views. You may go into therapy, you may start realizing what's been happening, what's been done to you, you may try to bring it back to them, but they will reject it. They will stick to that false narrative. They're absolutely unable to see you for who you are. They're absolutely unable to see beyond their own projection, beyond their own story. So you have to really completely remove yourself from that environment and any other environment, being in a friend group or whatever, where you are being a target of projections. And you essentially need to rebuild your life completely from scratch with people who are able to see you for who you are and treat you as a human being, and not as some sort of a repository of their own psychological garbage. And if you do that gradually, you will start seeing that there is this massive dichotomy between the story that they tell about you, the people from your past, and the story that, the reality that people who are in your life, in your adult life, reflect to you when you're not this sort of like a crazy person, crazy problem. So you need to weed out all those projections out of your system. And it comes with a lot of difficult feelings, with like a lot of anger and difficult emotions, and also with a lot of grief, because essentially you are realizing that you never existed in your family or whichever other important reference group that was. You never existed there. You were never seen by those people. They only ever have seen that projection, that idea, that story in their head. It's sort of like a collective psychosis. Projections in the past were at the heart of medieval witch hunts, that somebody in a community would be branded as a witch, a dangerous person, a heretic, somebody who is doing, weird things with the devil. And that obviously was not true. And these allegations were usually made by, some people with, today we would probably diagnose them as having delusions or narcissistic tendencies, but then the person that is accused gets treated as if they really are some sort of like a dark force. It's happening today as well. If you look at some famous or infamous miscarriages of justice, for example, the case of Amanda Knox, I believe that's a typical case of a projection that then grew into some sort of a fantastical story, because somebody who was investigating the horrible murder of Amanda's flatmate, Meredith character, didn't like her and had maybe some sort of tendencies to fantasize about satanic rituals or whatever, and they made up a story and then they pushed that story onto that like 20-year-old girl without any factual evidence. So projection and projective identification is something that is actually really dangerous, and if you are a person that has a tendency to attract projections, it can really have a very negative effect on your life. It usually comes from your childhood. It's very likely that in your childhood you were put into this scapegoat position when this dysfunctional family system just projected all their kind of sins onto you and used you to self-regulate, to maintain their fantasy idea of themselves as, a great, functioning, wonderful family, which they were not. And that created some sort of a wound in you that a lot of the time would attract these projections in the wider world. So if you want to recover from scapegoating abuse or childhood psychological abuse, then you need to learn about projection and projective identification, and you need to kind of go inside and learn to distinguish between who you really are as a person and your actions, the story that your life tells and the story that these people tell about you. And then you will really see that there is like a massive difference, and unfortunately most of the time there is no way that those people will ever be able to see you for who you are. I do think that they have a tendency to always try to pull you back into that narrative, into that story. So I do think that usually you will need to go completely no contact, and you will have to keep rebuilding your life and finding more friends and people who see you for who you are and who reflect the true story about you to you. So that's about as much as I wanted to tell you today, and see you next time.